Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be located, and welcome to NIJC's Policy Corner. I'm Mary Meg McCarthy, Executive Director of the National Immigrant Justice Center. We are excited you could join us today for this presentation, 2 weeks after Election Day, What's Next in Immigration Policy. With the recent elections, which continues to get a great deal of coverage in the media, we wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to talk about what we see, what is possible in the immigration arena. Our nation has been divided, and immigration law has been used to create further polarization. But what we know about this country and this nation and its founding is that we are a nation that believes in human rights, basic fundamental rights for all individuals, which includes access to legal status, access to basic fundamental protections, both under domestic and international law. And we believe that all individuals have a right to security and a fair day in court. And that's what the National Immigrant Justice Center is about. We want to continue to work in our community to ensure that people are well informed about their rights and how it impacts their families and their communities. Today's NIJC policy team and DACA expert will provide a reality check on our priority issues, and we will leave time at the end for questions and answers. We recognize that this is a complex area of law, and we hope that you'll be engaged and will be involved in participating in today's Policy Corner. For those of you who are not familiar with NIJC, we are an organization that is founded on our basic legal services. We represent about 10,000 individuals or provide legal counsel to 10,000 individuals a year. And our mission is to defend the legal rights of immigrants regardless of their background and to transform the immigration system to one that affords equal opportunity for all. What I love about NIJC is our clients. They are amazing. But at the same time, we have recognized that simultaneously we have to impact policy to ensure that our clients, that immigrants, are able to access fundamental due process protection. So we do this through our integral legal services that combines our direct legal services with systemic reform through federal litigation, advocacy and education, working with about 2,000 pro bono attorneys throughout the country. We are headquartered here in Chicago, and we have 5 offices throughout the country. We are so pleased that you are part of our community that fights and advances human rights for all individuals, including non-citizens. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Ellen Miller, our managing partner on our pro bono project, to provide you with a brief agenda and introduction as to today's program. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to continuing to partnering with you to advance justice.
Thanks, Mary Meg. So you heard it from our great executive director and leader of what we do and why we do it. Before we get further into the presentation, as she said, my name is Ellen Miller and I am pro bono manager at NIJC. A few logistics for today. Everybody is muted. We do have well over 200, almost 300 individuals online. So you're muted, but we want this to be engaging. So there is a chat box. There's a chat area on your screen. And we invite you to put comments and questions there, where our team will try to respond either in real time in the Q&A at the end, or if necessary, in a follow-up email. This presentation will definitely be recorded, and we'll be sharing the link either tomorrow or within this week, in addition to the materials that are attached. So you have 2 handouts that are attached here. One is a resource link compiled by the presenters today and NIJC's wealth of resources that we offer on our website. And then the second is a 1-page sheet on how you can get involved or stay involved as the times change. So we invite you to check out those handouts. They will be sent in the follow-up email with the recording And as always, if you need something, reach out in our website. We have a lot of materials at www.immigrantjustice.org. Now, we have a very, very full agenda, so I'm going to briefly go through this agenda and the main points, so we know we have the same expectations, and then we'll get to the good material. So first, we're going to hear from Naina Gupta, the Associate Director on Policy. She's going to provide a reality check on the general state of affairs, including issues in the lame duck session, moving forward, January 20th and beyond, and what is NIJC's current work in these transition conversations. After Naina gives us a general overview, we're going to issue specific reality checks. Azadeh Irfani, excuse me, is going to talk to us about asylum matters. Jesse Franz-Blau will talk about the fears and the hopes with enforcement and detention issues. Vanessa Esparza Lopez will be telling us what is happening with DACA and TPS right now and what can we expect. I'm sorry if you hear the construction below me. This is real, this is live. Julian Lasalde will then, last but not least, bring us to Sweet Home Chicago in the great state of Illinois to tell us about what's happening with Illinois communities. After this reality check, we will provide some ways for you to get involved or stay involved before we dive into what's hopefully a good chunk of time for questions and answers. So, as Mary Meg said, thanks for joining us. Naina, why don't you get us started?
Great, thanks so much, Ellen and Mary Meg. I'm Naina, I'm the Associate Director of Policy here at NIJC. Super grateful to have all of you join us today in what is obviously a critical moment in immigration policy and for our communities. After surviving, resisting 4 years of an anti-immigrant administration and agenda, the election, there is no question, is the turning of the tide for our clients and offers a sense of relief. That being said, while we are hopeful for what the future holds, we are also realistic about challenges that we foresee at NIJC on our policy team, both in the short term and in the long term for the communities that we are representing. So just to start, why are we hopeful in this moment? What we know is that immigrants and Black and brown organizers showed up in this election, and that the Biden-Harris ticket talked specifically on the campaign trail about the harms immigrants faced under the Trump administration. We're hopeful that the new administration will follow through on that talk and roll back the harms created under the prior administration, but also take forward-looking steps. And we are committed to holding them accountable to that. In other words, what we want first from this administration are immediate executive actions to roll back and mitigate the harms that have been imposed on immigrant communities in the past 4 years, especially. But second, we are also advocating here for longer lasting transformative change that doesn't just return us to Obama era immigration policies, but that is a new era in immigration with a transformative vision for how we enforce civil immigration laws. So in terms of this first piece, rolling back harms, what do we hope to see as immediate actions by a Biden administration in the first 100 days? So what we know, as most of you know, is that the Trump administration systematically targeted immigrants, but especially low-income Black and brown immigrants. Examples of this included the Muslim ban, specific targeting of one particular community, the public charge rule, which targeted low-income immigrants by making it harder to achieve lawful status based on the chance that an individual may have to rely on government for benefits or support. We saw executive orders rolling back critical legalization programs like DACA and TPS, and we saw an emphasis on family separation at the border. In light of these harms, the high priority items we have on our list for the first 100 days of a Biden administration include reversing all of Trump's anti-immigration executive orders, reinstating the refugee and asylum programs that have been gutted under Trump. And Azadeh on our team will speak more to that in a few minutes. We are also advocating for an end to the use of for-profit detention facilities, as well as the use of local jails for detaining immigrants within the first 100 days of this administration, access to free and safe COVID testing, treatment and vaccinations for all immigrants regardless of status, which has been an issue since the pandemic hit. We will continue to ask the administration to work with Congress to divest from ICE and CBP, and we will ask for immediate reinstatement of DACA and TPS. But in addition to being kind of hopeful, as I mentioned, for these immediate actions to roll back harm that we've seen, we are also realistic, and there are some reality checks that we have at NIJC in light of the context that we're in. So while we do have a new president, and we're hopeful and optimistic about that, we do still have a divided Congress and a polarized country, which will, in our view, make long-lasting legislative change harder to achieve. And so on that front, here is a list of some key pieces of legislation that we are focused on and organizing around, despite the realities that we're facing in Congress. So the Biden administration has talked about a legalization bill that it would plan to push in the first 100 days of office. We believe that a legalization bill, in light of the Congress we're looking at, will be extremely hard to win. But we will continue to advocate for a bold legalization package, which we define as inclusive of the full undocumented population, the 11 to 12 million or so folks here in this country who have no status, with fewer exclusions to getting legalization that we have seen in prior drafts of legalization bills or in prior such efforts. In addition to a legalization bill, we will continue to advocate for passage of the New Way Forward Act. This is a marker bill that was introduced in 2019 in the House, co-sponsored by several Congresspeople, including Congresswoman Jayapal, Bass, and Presley. New Way Forward emphasizes or has a focus on dismantling the criminal legal to deportation pipeline. So specifically, it ends the use of criminal prosecutions of civil immigration violations under sections 1325 and 1326. It decreases the use of local law enforcement agencies for the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And it significantly limits the criminal legal grounds that lead to the deportation of immigrants in our country. In addition to the New Way Forward Act, we also continue to support the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act. This is also a marker bill that overlaps with the New Way Forward Act, but focuses more squarely on ensuring humane detention conditions for those who are in immigration detention. It aims to decrease reliance on our detention system overall and focuses on increased oversight and accountability so that our elected members of Congress, as well as the public, have a better sense of what exactly is happening in the detention system nationwide. And then finally, we will continue to advocate and make efforts around congressional appropriations efforts. As Congress passes large appropriation bills, we will continue to urge both progressive and moderate Democrats to defund ICE and CBP. And so on that note, on the next slide, what you'll see is a graph of ICE's budget between 2004 and 2020 in terms of billions of dollars. ICE's budget for 2020 was $8.4 billion, which included $3.1 billion just for custody detention operations. And so if you go to the next slide, if we can see the next slide, the budget for CBP similarly is quite large at $17.4 billion for 2020, which is a significant increase from prior years. And so we will continue to advocate in Congress, despite the divided landscape we're seeing, for significant reductions in these numbers. So in addition to this kind of challenging reality we're facing on the legislative front, the second reality check that I would offer to all of you is that even in the immediate short term, in this lame duck session, there is opportunity for final blow from Trump and Stephen Miller, who has been the architect of the administration's anti-immigrant xenophobic agenda. There is still significant harm that can be inflicted in these last weeks on our communities and the individuals that we represent, primarily through the rulemaking and regulatory process, and particularly to our asylum system. And I will leave it to Azadeh on our team to speak more to that in a moment. But what goes along with that reality check is a third reality, which is that much of what Trump and Miller have done, much of their work has resulted in changes that are nuanced and not so easy to fix. And by that, I mean undoing some of those changes will require a full rulemaking process that requires public notice and comment period. And so we estimate that just restoring the baseline could take months, if not years, and I think importantly, critical political capital on the immigration front. So with these sort of challenging realities, but some hope, where do we fit in transition conversation? So we at NIJC have worked alongside many other organizations over the past 4 years, as many of you know, to resist this administration and to defend our communities. But we have also made sure to devote resources to forward-looking policy and legislative work to prepare for this moment. We are developing our own detailed policy proposals through a series of white papers, while also working in coalition to support the development of bold, long-term legislative and policy proposals that are based on consultations and direct input from impacted communities. And so one example of this is Moving Toward Justice, a project that we help co-lead and are heavily involved in, which is focused on creating a visionary immigration policy platform that offers a transformation overhaul of the US immigration system as we know it, but that is really based in the experiences of impacted communities and that is informed by a diverse group and range of stakeholders. What you'll see often in the policy space is this, defending what we have, trying to roll back harms, responding in small steps to changes. What Moving Toward Justice offers is a whole new blueprint for what a transformative immigration system can look like. And that is based on a lot of work we are doing in consultation with directly impacted community. In addition to this specific work and Moving Toward Justice, we are engaged in spaces that have developed detailed recommendations for executive actions beyond the list of high priority items that I shared with you. We are directly advising those involved in the transition itself. We are also working alongside member-based organizations and organizers to continue to develop a bolder vision of a US immigration system. On our policy team and at NIJC, we are ready to continue pushing for engagement and oversight through Congress and to re-engage and have a seat at the table as stakeholders with the executive branch. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone here. I've hoped to have offered you an overview. What I will say is that in terms of substantive priorities, we continue to focus on dismantling our reliance on our detention system, but also rebuilding the US asylum system, which Azadeh will speak to now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nina. Transitioning to speaking about asylum, I'm sure many of you are aware that asylum has been a huge target for this administration over the past 4 years. So what we wanted to talk about in terms of, 2 weeks out of the election is there is a significant fear still over the next few weeks with respect to what's going to happen with asylum regulations in particular. So over the past 4 years, there's been a lot of news about border wall, in particular a physical border wall, but less coverage about the wall of paper that this administration has created through harmful regulations and policies. Your materials, which are under a handout drop-down option on the right side and will be also sent over to you, include an asylum timeline that NIJC has been keeping over the past 4 years that basically tracks all of the ways in which this administration has been chipping away at the system and proposing regulations that would really eviscerate protections for asylum seekers. And so the unfortunate news is that they're still doing that even after the elections. The administration has signaled that they're about to drop some rules that would gut asylum and due process protections right before they get out the door. In essence, they're rushing through the regulatory process to inflict lasting damage on asylum seekers. And specifically, some of you may recall that there was a rule in June that was issued by this administration, and NIJC coordinated a common campaign against that rule. 89,000 people and organizations stood up against that rule, and which again was, the comments were closed in July of this year. So there hasn't been that much time for the administration to digest all of those comments. And nevertheless, they're about to finalize it. And we in the advocacy community are preparing for a really terrible final rule that we're going to have to combat by use basically all of the tools in our toolbox to try to combat. Now, that's what's going to happen in the next few weeks. But in terms of the Biden administration, the next administration coming in, there's still a lot of concerns about that transition as well. And so that's basically the reality check here, which is that there's some changes that the Trump administration has made to the asylum system that may linger for a really long time. One of those changes, which is particularly troublesome, is the intersection between this pandemic and asylum. Currently, the border is closed because this administration has exploited the pandemic to shut out asylum seekers and shut the border altogether, even though there's no evidence whatsoever that asylum seekers are to blame for 11 million people in this country having been infected with this virus, or 250,000 passing because of it. So again, it's, the administration has been really clever at using scapegoating asylum seekers when the issue was actually a domestic crisis of their own fabrication. However, what's concerning is that the Biden administration has yet to commit to allowing asylum seekers back in under the pandemic with public health protections like testing at the border. Why we're concerned about this? Honestly, if the border is not open at all, but asylum regulations are rolled back, to the past before this administration came along, we're still not going to have asylum protections. We're still going to be in violation of our obligations to actually allow asylum seekers access to these protections. And a really good illustration of this is a radio story from This American Life that actually aired less than a week ago. And that segment follows 2 asylum seekers from Nicaragua who came to the border prepared to seek asylum with a backpack full of evidence that they had prepared that showed that they were tortured back in their home country and that their lives were at risk if they were turned back. And this administration used the COVID-19 pandemic to turn them straight back and send them again to Nicaragua, where they're living in hiding and fearing for their lives at every moment. The other thing that I just want to mention about this is that what's disappointing here is, there's no rainy day for asylum policy. So it's not it's not that we should be complying with asylum law when it's convenient. The point of asylum law and asylum protection is that it's about extending this, extending support and a fair process to individuals whose lives are at stake. So, and there are safe ways to do it, and these, and we really truly hope that the Biden administration will be committing to undoing this COVID-19 ban on asylum, and will be clear-minded enough to not fall prey to that same rationale. The last thing I want to end with is a note of hope. Every time there is a crisis, there's also an opportunity to rethink the system altogether. So this year in 2020 marked the 40th anniversary of the Refugee Act of 1980, which is the most momentous legislation that was created 40 years ago in order to protect asylum seekers. And there was a lot of promise in that legislation. And why that's important is that, you know, it's past time to basically recommit to a safe and just asylum system that doesn't punish asylum seekers, detain them, and essentially try to deter their entry into the United States. Now, asylum intersects with a lot of other issues, including detention and enforcement. So I'm going to actually turn it now to my colleague Jesse, who's going to speak more on those issues.
Thanks so much, Azadeh. So I'm going to speak a little bit about, of course, for starting out, some of the concerns and worries that we will likely be seeing during this lame duck period with regards to immigration enforcement and detention. So we've already seen, there's certainly merited fear with regards to raids and deportations that could be coming in the next months. Last week, we saw there were just 80 people transferred from Virginia detention facilities here near DC who were deported to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, just as these countries are recovering from a pandemic and managing a devastating storm there. There were also 50 Cameroonian asylum seekers deported last week despite threat of persecution and death there in their country. And with regards to ICE expansion, over the last year, we've really seen how ICE and private companies have sought to extend detention contracts to go well into the next decade. In the midst of the pandemic, even, ICE has continued to seek to expand, and companies like Immigration Centers of America, which operates a detention facility out here near DC in Virginia, they've pursued new facilities that we know of in Illinois, Maryland, and Michigan, continuing to try to expand. And just weeks ago, ICE released new requests for information in pursuit of contracts, in pursuit of detention centers in New York, New Jersey, and the Denver area. So we can definitely expect to see the same private companies respond to these proposals as ICE seeks to expand during this lame duck. And the next administration will have a huge undertaking, of course, to roll back the tide of mass immigration incarceration. In terms of expectations, though, going forward for the next administration, we know the privately driven ICE detention system has had a devastating human impact over the years. The U.S. immigration detention system operates under this large patchwork of contracts, with more than 90% of people detained by ICE being held in county or local jails, or jails contracting with ICE, or in large prison complexes owned or operated by private prison companies. And what we've seen, though, over the last several months, there's been a decline in the detention population, largely because of the border closure brought about by the Trump administration's response to the pandemic, as well as lawsuits forcing ICE to release people from deadly conditions in detention centers. Those who remain detained continue to be at heightened risk of contracting COVID-19 and on top of the suffering from well-documented abuses in the system. But the pandemic has really also laid bare the systemic abuses in ICE detention, the inhumane conditions, the mismanagement, the lack of medical treatment, the lack of oversight, and it has also enhanced calls to phase out immigration detention altogether. So NIJC supports overall cuts in funding to ICE and CBP and significant reductions in funding for detention to levels no higher than the current detention population. And the next administration, it's going to be important that the next administration ends the use of detention, of course, for arriving asylum seekers, and really embrace community-based case management programs. And so in terms of some hope in transition, there certainly is merited hope. The incoming administration says they'll seek to implement a 100-day freeze on deportations and issue guidance narrowing who can be arrested by immigration agents, importantly. And many groups, of course, are also advocating for the incoming administration to take urgent measures to release people from custody who are still detained during the COVID crisis and take measures to transform the detention system going forward. So as Nina mentioned, we're calling for an end to private detention contracts, an end to private detention and contracts with local and county jails in the first 100 days of the administration. And so overall, NIJC supports a phase out to immigration detention as part of a broad coalition of groups calling for a dramatic reduction into the use of punitive custody, the adoption of a presumption of liberty for those facing civil removal proceedings, and investment in communities to create and support the growth of community-based case management systems. So we're advocating for the next administration to be forward-looking, to not return to the pre-Trump levels of immigration detention, which reached upwards of 40,000, as we know during the Obama years. We want the next administration to move away from programs that were enacted even before the Trump administration that also included mass fingerprinting and collaboration with ICE and local law enforcement and large-scale arrests and deportations and detention. We want forward-looking policy changes to really shift the immigration system away from a security-based one towards one that treats immigration as a human issue. So next we'll hear from my colleague, Vanessa, who will talk more about TPS issues and DACA.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, so super quick recap on what's going on with DACA and TPS. I think it's always good to do a review of what DACA is, right, and where we're at. So we know Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, was an executive action under the Obama administration, started in 2012. And through that, eligible individuals received protection from deportation, which is the deferred action, and a work permit for a 2-year period that is subject to renewal. And DACA beneficiaries have expressed an ability to, how DACA has benefited them, right? Whether it's through an ability to continue their education or the opportunity to seek better employment opportunities, and importantly, a peace of mind concerning their safety and their stability in this country. Unfortunately, that stability, that safety has been placed in jeopardy since this current administration's announcement in September of 2017 that they were going to end the DACA program. Shortly after that announcement was made, there were several lawsuits filed across the United States trying to stop the administration from ending the DACA program. There was also one lawsuit filed trying to stop the DACA program from continuing. So these lawsuits have made their way up through the district courts, the circuit courts, and eventually made their way to the Supreme Court, which heard oral arguments in November of 2019 in some of the consolidated DACA cases. And this past June, the Supreme Court issued its decision. And in the decision, the Supreme Court found that the administration had violated the Administrative Procedures Act in its efforts to end the DACA program. So while the Supreme Court found that the administration's efforts to end the DACA program were illegal, it did not reach or touch the question with regards to the constitutionality of the program itself. And so for us as advocates, it was a welcomed decision for sure. It was a momentary sigh of relief for us and for DACA beneficiaries and those that would be eligible for the program. But we realized that the program still remained in limbo because the administration does have the power to end the DACA program. They just need to make sure that they follow the law when they try to do so. And in fact, Chief Justice Roberts, in his opinion, kind of laid out the roadmap to how the administration should have ended the program. Where are we now? Well, after the Supreme Court decision, we felt that the DACA program was restored to its existence under the Obama administration, which meant that we felt that the decision compelled the Department of Homeland Security to begin accepting applications once again for initial applicants, as well as accept applications once again for an ancillary benefit known as advanced parole. However, in June of this year, over the summer, we saw that Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, issued a policy memo that signaled the agency's extensive review of the DACA program. And the memo in particular instructed the agency to not accept any new initial applications. The memo also severely restricted the ability for a DACA beneficiary to seek advanced parole. And unfortunately, most unfortunately, or it's all unfortunate, but for current DACA applicants, it reduced the benefits from 2 years to 1 year, while still keeping the price for DACA renewals at $495. So basically, people are having to pay double the price for the benefits that they are receiving. We have yet to see what further actions the Department of Homeland Security may take in this lame duck session with regards to DACA. But just this past Saturday, a judge in one of the DACA cases in New York, in the Batalla Vidal versus Wolf case, that judge found that the July 2020 memo issued by Wolf was invalid because he was unlawfully serving as acting secretary of DHS. And this is about the 6th case or so where the administration has lost on the issue of the validity of Wolf's role as the acting secretary. Several courts have found that his appointment as acting secretary was against the Federal Vacancies and Reform Act, as well as the Department of Homeland Security Act. But this decision from this past Saturday should return the DACA program to its initial form, which means reopening DACA for first-time applicants, restoring work authorization and renewals to 2 years instead of 1 year, and making travel and advanced parole available to DACA recipients without so many restrictions. We at NIJC will be ready to file initial DACA applications and applications for advanced parole as soon as we are able to, and we will continue doing our monthly DACA renewal clinics as well. In terms of hopes for the future, the President-elect Biden has indicated that he will restore the DACA program within his first 100 days of the administration. So as advocates, we are going to certainly hold him to those statements. With regards to any legislative action that could benefit DACA recipients, as Nina pointed to earlier, there are certainly some obstacles, some reality checks that we're facing with regards to a legislative fix. Now for TPS, if some of you are not as familiar with TPS is really a life-saving benefit under our immigration laws that allows foreign nationals to remain in the United States if, while they were in the US, their country of origin prevented their safe return, whether it was because some sort of natural disaster, war, famine, an epidemic, things of that nature. And similar to DACA, TPS allows people to work lawfully in the United States, and it gives them protection from deportation. There are currently 10 countries designated for TPS, including El Salvador, Honduras, Sudan, Haiti, Nepal, Syria, and others. And many TPS holders have lived in the United States for decades and have established deep roots in this country. So as with DACA recipients, TPS beneficiaries, their lives have been put in turmoil under this administration because this administration announced, or rather has tried to terminate TPS for several countries. But as with DACA, those efforts have been heavily litigated in the courts. There are currently about 9 different lawsuits dealing with TPS in the courts. The legal challenges that they're presenting in those cases are that the decision to end TPS stems from racial animus, that it violates the Immigration and Nationality Act as well as the Administrative Procedures Act. And two of these lawsuits in particular are also trying to protect the right of some TPS beneficiaries, their right to be able to seek their lawful permanent residence or their green card in the United States, despite some unfortunate and unlawful changes to USCIS policy that have come out recently. And with the cases, some of the litigation that's going on with TPS, one of the cases out of the Ninth Circuit, unfortunately, this past September, a 3-judge panel from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 to remove an injunction blocking the Trump administration from phasing out TPS for some of these countries. So again, we'll have to see what steps the administration tries to do with regards to TPS in the time that it has left. Some of the countries that currently are designated for TPS, their benefits are set to expire in early January, and then it's kind of on a rolling basis from there. President-elect Biden has indicated that he's going to order a review of the TPS program, and that he's going to protect TPS holders from being returned to unsafe countries. So we will certainly hold him to that, but and really push to have a full reinstatement of DACA and TPS, as Nina mentioned. Now I'm gonna kick it off to my colleague, Julian Lasalde, who's our civic engagement and policy analyst, to discuss what's going on at the local and state level.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Julian Lasalde with NIJC, working on as the civic engagement policy analyst, working exclusively on NIJC's local, municipal, county, and state level work, but also, as always, trying to stay in as much contact and working in conjunction with my colleagues in Washington, D.C. and the other aspects of what we do at NIJC. So as Vanessa mentioned, and Ellen mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to speak a little bit about what is going on here locally. And you may have already sort of sensed this, but the thread that seems to be kind of running through all this is this idea of relief, which I can certainly speak to with our local partners, which is that there's certainly a sense of relief in terms of what has happened over the last couple of weeks. But it should also temper it by saying that there's more than that, I would say, is really resolved, right? Resolved by the local advocates that I am fortunate enough to work with and represent in NIJC at certain local and state level advocacy tables. There's a lot of resolve, right, to continue pushing our agenda regardless of who is our agenda, legislative initiatives and policy ideas, and just the basic humanity of our immigrant communities, pushing that more than anything, perhaps, with elected official stakeholders at all levels of government, regardless of who is in what position of power, and regardless of what party they may represent. Because as we know that this is not something, the situation we're in now is not something that is new or simply just came about over the last 4 years. So I think really it's relief and resolve for the folks we work with. And it's a pleasure and an honor to work with them and represent NIJC as a part of that. So I'll start at the Chicago level and start by talking about this years-long effort by local and statewide coalition partners to strengthen the rights and due process protections for immigrants, again, in Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois across the state. And here in Chicago, I have been fortunate enough to represent NIJC along with some of my other colleagues in what is called the Sanctuary for All Coalition. So this has been focused mostly at the city level here in Chicago. And there's been efforts since essentially 2015 to strengthen what is known as the Welcoming City Ordinance, which is an ordinance that was put in place during the Rahm Emanuel administration, which set out some specific guidelines for different city agencies, but with a sort of a focus on the Chicago Police Department, what they can and cannot do in relationship to immigrant communities, and also working with federal immigration authorities. And so since then, we've been working to try to strengthen that existing ordinance. And so what we have now is we had a great victory earlier this year in January 2020 with what is known as the ACT Ordinance, ACT Ordinance, which lays out a host of accountability measures for different city agencies, but again, with the focus on the Chicago Police Department in terms of what they do and how they interact with federal immigration authorities, which we did not have in local statute, which is now thankfully there. But as a there's one piece that remains to be done, and we are fortunate in the sense that we have some. We've been working with the city with now the Lightfoot administration, and looks as though by December of this year, so next month in a couple of weeks, we will be able to essentially finish off this 5-year-long effort with the remaining changes, which are known as 4 different carve-outs to the existing Welcoming City Ordinance, which currently do not allow protections for specific individuals in the immigrant community who may have been at some point throughout their life basically caught up in the legal justice system here in Chicago or the state of Illinois or here in the country. And so now we hope that with the passage of the expected passage of these amendments in a couple of weeks through the Chicago City Council, that the entire gamut of immigrants living in the city of Chicago will have due process protections available to them. So we're really excited about that, and we will continue to work with the mayor's office and obviously with our coalition partners to make that happen. Here at the state level, there is obviously COVID has impacted everybody, and we were looking to 2020 to be the year where we would basically be able to work on a series of accountability measures for local law enforcement agencies across the state of Illinois and their interactions with federal immigration enforcement agencies. Unfortunately, given the very truncated state legislative calendar at the beginning of this year, and also the cancellation of what is known as veto session, which would have happened this week, in fact, as another potential opportunity to speak with and work with state elected officials in Springfield. We now know that we will have to kick this into 2021 to work with the governor's office, work with state elected officials in both the chambers to pass some further accountability measures to ensure that local law enforcement agencies are essentially held more accountable to following current state laws. There have been some state laws that have been put in place over the last couple of years through what is primarily known as the Campaign for Welcoming Illinois, which also NIJC is a part of, and I've been a part of that table as well. And so we are looking to hopefully do that in 2021, where we will have the ability to have those accountability measures passed. We're still working on some of the language of it because circumstances obviously have changed in relationship to COVID, but through our coalition partners, we hope that we will be able to have some sort of a legislative vehicle hopefully ready by early 2021, and also working with the governor's office and other law enforcement and other agencies and stakeholders to have something that is recognizing of the work that is done by all stakeholders, but at the end of the day, centering impacted communities, immigrant communities, and making sure that they have the ability across the state of Illinois to feel comfortable contacting local law enforcement agencies if they so need that for any number of reasons. And so again, that will be done through what's known as the Campaign for Welcoming Illinois, which is a table that I and other colleagues at NIJC have been a part of over the last couple of years as well. And so with that, I know it's brief and quick, but I will send it back to my colleague, Ellen Miller.
Thanks, Julian. So we had a very, very full agenda today. Hope that you got a lot of information, and we got a lot of questions and comments already flowing in the chat. We're trying to respond to those as quickly as possible. Before we open up the last few minutes for question and answer, it is important, and we recognize it takes a village to get all this done. And so here's a few opportunities to get involved. In addition to the handout, please check out that handout. Please share it widely, and please stay involved. Our big ask for today is, to reach out to representatives and to tell your Congress to cut funding for abuses against immigrants. There is a link right there that will facilitate you doing that if you so choose to do it with NIJC in that way. We continue to provide updates on information and policy changes, legal changes. So please stay in tune with our website. Also, if you're a pro bono attorney, we have a very long and active pro bono list. About 72 individuals or matters are looking to be placed with pro bono support. So please reach out to me or any NIJC staff that you see here, and we will gladly connect you with a a case. And last but not least, it is that time for annual appeal, and to keep our work going, we do definitely appreciate your donations to NIJC and to allow us to continue the work that we're doing. Before we jump into this Q&A, we appreciate your feedback. We want to know what you thought about this presentation and how things are going. If you hold your device up to this QR code, it should take you to the link. Otherwise, there's a survey link there. It's 5 questions. And so please tell us how we're doing, and if there's something else that you want to hear about, we'd love to hear that. Our next policy corner, we know that at the end of the year can be hectic, so our next policy corner will be January 12th, January 12th, same time, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. But in the meantime, we're going to end this year, you know, through everything that's happened, we recognize that our community is what holds us together. And so we have a really special presentation happening on Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day on December 10th. And we hope that you and your colleagues and your friends can join us in a celebration of our community's resilience and dedication to justice. So with that, I'm going to shut off my webcam now and invite my colleagues to rejoin us on their webcam, and so that we can start answering the questions. And I think the first one that we'll start with, we have about 5 minutes today. And I know that some of my colleagues are willing to stay on and continue the conversations for maybe an additional 3 to 5 minutes, respecting everybody's time. But the first question that I'd like to ask today to maybe Nina or Azadeh, if you could jump in, is could you explain a little bit more, once again, about what it means to divest, and what does NIJC mean for divesting for CBP and ICE?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that. That's a great question, and thanks to Jesse, who also, you know, covered more about what we're seeing on the detention and enforcement side. But, you know, basically the campaign, the push to divest is an ask for significant reductions in funding of both CBP and ICE in light of the long history both agencies have of abuse and violence and human rights violations. The graphs that I shared at the beginning of the presentation gave you a sense of the sort of insane spikes we've seen in the budgets for both agencies since 2004. And so alongside many other organizations and advocates, we continue to push when we say to divest from those agencies, to reduce the taxpayer dollars that are going towards both agencies in light of all of the problems that we've seen and all of the ways in which they target our communities in unjust and very harmful ways, and because we believe that we can have an effective civil immigration enforcement system without abusive agencies that violate human rights. We don't need those agencies to be funded with billions of taxpayer dollars to enforce civil immigration rules. So that's what we mean when we talk about divest.
Great, thanks for that. There's quite a number of questions too about transition teams and individuals that are involved in transition teams. Kind of keeping it at the federal level maybe, or, you know, feel free to jump in at the local level. Would you be able to comment on, you know, just a little bit further on former DHS officials as part of the transition team and not turning back the clock, but still moving forward?
Yeah, so I think it's good to just be frank about what the concerns are, right? So what we're seeing is that some of the folks being chosen by the Biden team for transition and going forward are former Obama officials. And some of those folks we know were responsible for immigration policies that were harmful to our communities. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety about that in our communities and as advocates. And so kind of to Ellen's point, our push on all fronts in our any conversations we have with the transition team or new administration folks is to make sure that whoever's at the table, whether they're coming from an old Obama team or not, is thinking in a forward-looking way about immigration. And what that means is, again, rolling back the harms we've seen under Trump, but not just being okay with where we were before he became president, but really going beyond that. The past 4 years have shed light on how broken the system is, and our communities and advocates are much farther along in the asks that we're making of a presidential administration in rethinking this system. And so we very much plan to make those asks of whoever's at the table, even if their past and background is from a previous administration.
Thanks, Nina. I'm going to toss it over back into Julian and potentially Vanessa's court here about, there's been some questions about community needs and the role of sanctuary cities in our communities and in the immigration proposals. Julian, would you be able to talk a little bit more about the role of sanctuary cities and immigration policy proposals? And of course, Vanessa, feel free to chime in about other community needs as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think I did see that question. I would say, I think one of the bigger, just based on the work that I've been a part of here at the Chicago level, again, especially over the last 5 years through the Sanctuary for All Coalition, is pushing back on, I think, the role that we can play here through this sanctuary city movement, not just from elected officials, but more so at the advocate level and organizer level and community member level, is that messaging of pushing back on the criminalization of immigrants and this refusal to accept that immigrants who may have come into contact, the political refusal, unfortunately, by members of both parties, both major parties, the refusals to accept that immigrants who may have come into contact with the law enforcement agencies or our justice system at some point should automatically pay a second price once their case has been adjudicated and if they've had to serve time, right? That is at the heart of what the Sanctuary for All Coalition is working on to get to have done away with by the Chicago City Council in a couple of weeks, in fact. And thankfully, after years of work, now this administration is looking forward to striking these carve-outs, which focus on, for the last couple of years, have essentially allowed the Chicago Police Department to not allow for due process protections for individuals who may have had or have an outstanding criminal warrant. On its face, a lot of people say, oh, I don't like how that sounds, but if you, that means that you're currently in the criminal justice system and you deserve due process protections like anyone else, right? Or another carve out is, it focuses on people who have been convicted of a felony before. Well, if you've been convicted of a felony, you paid your debt to society and you deserve to be able to rebuild your life. Another carve out is if you've been identified as being a part of the Chicago or any law enforcement gang database. And again, here, especially in the city of Chicago, there have been independent studies that have verified that the Chicago Police Department's gang database is riddled with errors, and at best is riddled with errors, but there's also a lot of that is based on just racial profiling of particularly young men, young Black men and young Latino men in the city of Chicago. And so for us, this continued push as advocates push back on that narrative of the criminal, of the felons, not families, right, is something that advocates here have refused to accept when it comes to what our sanctuary city policy can look like here in the city of Chicago and hopefully what it can look like in other jurisdictions. So I would say I think that's one of the bigger takeaways, but I don't know if others have any other strong feelings on that.
If there's nothing else to say, I will just recognize and appreciate everybody's time. And so I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today. There's a lot of information. We will send this in a follow-up email. Thank you to our presenters for sharing all of the work that you're doing. And we hope to see you in December. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.